go. Anyway, well, good morning, everybody. Just for the benefit of the little thing for those who can't be here today. This week we are going to look at the Book of Ruth, and the Book of Ruth is like a bridge between Judges and between 1 Samuel. So it's just right there. It's like a little sliver of cheese and a nice piece of bread, and it's an absolutely a wonderful book. And the title for today's sermon is Ruth's Noble Choice, because it was a very noble choice. And basically she was saying, I will go, which is the big call, which is the big challenge for every Christian. I will go, or will you go? Because we're called to go and to preach the gospel. So we're going to be having a look at this wonderful true life account of what faithfulness looks like in this account of Ruth. What biblical faithfulness, what ordinary everyday faithfulness looks like. While the book is really quite brief in many ways, it has a beauty about it which makes it easy to read in one sitting, as I said a few minutes ago. But we're gonna cover this in the next 3, possibly 4 weeks. Yeah, definitely 3 weeks. Although there's 4 chapters. And what's really interesting about Ruth is that it's one of only 2 books in the entire Bible in which a lady is the principal character. So that's absolutely fantastic. So one is the Book of Ruth, and the other one is the Book of Esther, about Queen Esther, which we will look at later on this year. And it's a fantastic story. It's like a Jason Bourne movie. A Queen Esther is with intrigues, with villains, with, well, there's not so much a car chase, but I'm sure there's a camel chase somewhere. But it's absolutely fantastic. And so in chapter 1, which we're going to look at today, we actually read about Ruth's noble choice. And just remember that word, because nobility is something which you don't hear about these days, but it's something now which used to put towards kings and queens and stuff. So I'm just going to read it in chapter 1. So here we go. We've all got it in the Bibles, if you've got a Bible. So here we go. In the days when judges ruled Israel, there was a famine in the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech. Now I kind of sort of stumble over some of his words. And the man's name was Elimelech. His wife's name was Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem, Judah. And they went to Moab and lived there. Now, Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other named Ruth. After they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband. Absolute tragedy. Verse 6. When Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, this was back in Israel, she and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there. With her 2 daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living and set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. Then Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness as you have shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband." Then she kissed them goodbye, and they wept aloud, and said to her, "We will go back with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters, it is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has turned against me." At this they wept aloud, and wept aloud again. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. "Look," said Naomi, "your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her." But Ruth replied, Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you from me. When Naomi realised that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. So the two women went on until they came to Bethlehem. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the woman exclaimed, "Can this be Naomi?" "Don't call me Naomi," as she told them. "Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me." So Naomi returned from Moab, accompanied by Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, arriving in Bethlehem as the barley harvest was just beginning. What an amazing story. The Book of Ruth is like a beautiful little account of almost like an interlude of love in the midst of something quite nasty. And it took place in a period where judges ruled Israel. Now later on, kings started to rule them, but until that point, going back to the time of Moses, they had all of these judges who were ruling, one for each of the tribes. It's quite an amazing time. And so that was the time when judges ruled. But historically, this was a period of time marked by several really notable facts. The first one was gross immorality. It was a nasty time. There was idolatry and child sacrifice. It was rife right across all of the kingdoms, even though they were supposed to know God. And there was lots of wars. So basically, it was a pretty bad time for everybody in that entire region. There was also not only major wars, but there were smaller civil wars going on, and crime was absolutely rife. Now, this was written about 1,322 years or so BC, before Jesus came along, possibly by Samuel the prophet, who was quite an amazing character. Again, we're going to look at him a little bit later on this year, but nobody's really certain who did actually pen this, to be honest with you. But this is how bad things were in those days. In the book of Judges, which is just before Ruth, now don't turn to it, in chapter 21, this is what it says about these days that they're living in. It says, "In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes." Now when the Bible says something like that, everyone did what was right in their own eyes, that means basically that there was mayhem. It was complete chaos. There was no order there was going on. And that's a mark of like places where there's civil war, when there's unrest. You see it on the news when there's terrible things go on. You know, where people just do as they please. You know, people will kill with no comeback. People will do all kind of nasty things with no kind of comeback whatsoever. But within this true life account, because it is all true, tells this amazingly heartwarming story of devotion and faithfulness of this young lady Ruth. Now devotion and faithfulness, even today, is rarer than rock and horse teeth sometimes. No, you just can't find it. And so as this true life account, it was telling a story concerning a Moabite widow, Ruth, who we're going to come to, who leaves her homeland to go back to Israel, to live with her Jewish mother-in-law called Naomi in the land of Israel. Now what's interesting was that the Moabites, which is where they moved to, were descended from a fella called Lot. Now if you know any kind of Bible stories, you know that that Lot's wife was turned to a pillar of salt in the Old Testament when she looked back, when God told her not to. And he was a nephew of Abraham, who was quite a big character in the book. But Moab was the son of Lot, following this completely immoral relationship between a Lot who got really drunk and his daughter. So it was a pretty, grim situation. Now the Bible's good like this because it's warts and all. Nothing's hidden. They did wrong, and Moab was a relationship of this relationship between his dad and his daughter. And in fact, the Moabites at many times in history, they were also enemies of Israel. And then if the wind changed, they'd then be friends of Israel. So that was this kind of love-hate relationship going on. But one of the main thrusts of this book, and and in particular chapter 1, is that God honours Ruth's commitment, as you heard through there, by later on, as we go through the other chapters, by guiding her to the field of a man called Boaz, who we're going to meet later on, who was like a near kinsman or relative to Naomi. And it's the place where she gets a job and she starts gathering grain. And we see some beautiful illustrations and some stories through that. And then later on, she finds this amazing place in the genealogy or the family tree of Jesus himself and his family. But this was a foreign girl. And it's absolutely amazing. And it's kind of generally been agreed that the book serves three main purposes, to teach us. The first one is to illustrate how God rewards those who make wise, spiritual and practical decisions. You see, there's no reason for a Christian to be a Dumbo. There really isn't, to make poor decisions, because we have a God who we can ask for a wisdom. We have his words which we can read to give us guidance, you see. So God rewards those who make wise, spiritual and practical choices. The second thing is to show God's pleasure for those who show steadfast family loyalty where they can, which is of great worth to God's own heart. You see, as we read this, how Ruth stands by Naomi when she didn't have to. She wanted to stay with her because she loved her and she was devoted to her. And that's a great picture of the church, about how we have to cling to Jesus. And that's why we need to stand together in tough times, in rough times, in good times. Faithfulness, as a fellowship, is an amazing gift to one another, where if somebody is down or hurt or ill or whatever, that the church can just gather around and say, how can we help? So this comes out in here as well. And the third purpose in some ways is to explain how this Ruth, who was a Moabitess, came to be an ancestor of King David, which is quite an amazing thing. And there's a genealogy now in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 1. You don't have to turn to it, but I'm just going to read this out because the Jews are very big on genealogy, because they could trace back all of their ancestors going all the way back, like their lineage. And in Matthew's Gospel, this is what it says. Matthew's Gospel, chapter 1. And it's got some really big names in here, so feel free to laugh if I stumble over them, but don't laugh too loudly. This is the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac. Isaac was the father of Jacob. Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers. Judah the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. Perez the father of Hezron. Hezron the father of Ram. Ram the father of Amminadab. And Amminadab, and I got the name wrong straight away, and Amminadab, who was the father of Nashron. Nashron was the farmer of Salmon. What a great name, Salmon. Who are you, Mr. Salmon? Salmon was the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Rahab was a prostitute. Boaz was the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of King David. So in there we find that Ruth gets mentioned, which is absolutely amazing. She had no right to be there because she was a foreigner. She was foreign from Israel, but she finds herself in there, which is absolutely amazing. And that talks about adoption, about how God brings us into his absolutely amazing family. And I just love this. So we're just gonna go through this, and it's really quite exciting. So we find that there's this huge famine which prompts this journey, and it says in chapter 1. It says, chapter 1 verse 1, there was a famine in the land. So in the day of the judges, prior to the kings, there was a famine. There's a great famine in the land of Judah, and we see that there's this family of four leave Bethlehem to go all the way to Moab, where it seems that there was food and that there was safety. We're not told what causes the famine, whether it was drought or whether it was war or whether it was, or we just don't know. But there was a famine there, and they made this journey, which wasn't an easy one because it was a bit of a distance. And but it was probably a matter of life or death. No one wants to starve, do they, or go hungry? And bearing in mind that they didn't have freezers in those days, they didn't have like a Tesco's or a Morrison's where they could go and stock up and everything else. Well, if you grew it, you ate it. If you could catch it, you ate it, and that was about it. There wasn't any kind of refining process for long food, really. And it tells us that they came from Bethlehem, which is a city about 5 miles south of Jerusalem, which was the birthplace of both King David and of Jesus. I remember at Christmas we sing "O Little Town of Bethlehem." Well, that's where they came from, and they were going to this place called Moab, which was a country just the other side of the Dead Sea, and it was founded by these descendants of Moab, who was the son of Lot. Now, this family, again, we see it in Ruth at verse 2, and it says the man's name was Elimelech, his wife's name was Naomi, which means pleasure, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahon and Kilion. And the Bible tells us that they were Ephrathites from Bethlehem. Now, sometimes you come across these words, you think, oh, that's a strange word. But it's always, excuse me, but it's always worth just looking up what they actually mean, because the word Ephrath, from which you get the word Ephrathites, in Hebrew, it actually means fruitful, an abundance of fruit, and Bethlehem means house of bread, because that was a big industry there. They used to make lots of bread, which was sent all over the place. So think about it. So there was a famine in the land, and they had to flee because there was no food in Bethlehem, or to give it his other turn, Ephrath, which means abundance fruit and house of bread. It was a very, very poor name for that place at that time, wasn't it? Because there was no fruit, there was no food. So they had to flee, and they had to flee quite quick. So they had to go because of the famine, and bearing in mind that there was no aid agencies at that time to fly in with food and water. It was move or die, very simple. But also, it's actually been suggested by commentators that when you read through this, that perhaps there was a lack of faith in God, which made them move as well. Because as Jews, they knew the stories about how God had provided for them in the desert when they were spent 40 years in the desert. Every day there was manna from heaven, and there was quail at night time. So they were getting fed. God's provision. So did they move in a little bit of lack of faith? I think that they did. But also, they had to think about the practical sides as well. So the two go hand in hand, like that. So they move away, they travel to Moab, and then verse 3, we see something which is absolutely awful. And when you read accounts like this, spend time just to think about what you're reading, because we can read over something like this. Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. That took about a second to read, a second and a half to read. You think, oh yeah, okay. And that goes on. But just think about what that was like, because this was real. So he died, he leaves Naomi a widow with 2 sons. What a terrible event. And what a distress that would have been caused to be widowed in a foreign land when you couldn't really go back because there was trouble there. It's very real life, isn't it? It's very real life. You hear of this happen to people who move away, or people who move over here and then somebody dies and they're stuck. The Bible's real. It's not just, little stories. So then we find in verse 4 that the 2 sons, they marry some ladies of Moab. And that's actually quite interesting, because such marriages were frowned upon by the Jews, because the Jews didn't like to intermarry with other races. That was a command from God. So that was strange that they'd even moved there in the first place, but also for them to take foreign wives, was really quite not the done thing at the time, but they did anyway. And we see in verse 4, and they lived there about 10 years. So they've been there 10, 11 years as a region. But then there's another tragedy as you read through this. It says, after they'd lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Kilion also died. And Naomi was left without 2 sons and her husband. What another tragedy. Now, when you read this, like I said, you can go over this really quite quick. Lost a husband, she had lost both the sons. Now, we're not told what happened, whether they were attacked, or whether they caught disease, or whether they had an accident, or they had a fight. We just don't know. But what a tragedy that now both of her sons, both of her children died. lost her husband, and had now died in a foreign place. And she was overcome with it, absolutely overcome. Just imagine how you would feel. It's bad enough when we lose somebody that we know, like a brother or sister, but just imagine losing, everybody around you. So, just to sum up that first little bit, Elimelech and his sons went to Moab to find bread, but instead they found their graves. So, bereaved of her husband and 2 sons, Naomi actually starts thinking about heading back to her homeland. And I can't say that I blame her, actually. What a terrible position to have been in. I mean, just imagine the loss of that family. Thank goodness that today's we have things like Skype, don't we, and FaceTime and phones, so we can ring and sort of make contact with people. But for her to contact her relatives back home, it wasn't easy. There wasn't a postal service as such. So, so she decides to go home. But the reason that she decides home, the clue is in verse 6, and it says this: when Naomi heard in Moab, obviously somebody came and spoke with her, that the Lord had come to the aid of his people back in Israel by providing food for them, she and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there. With her 2 daughters-in-law, she left the place where she'd been living and set out on the road that would take her back to the land of Judah. So it seems that the Lord's blessing had come back in Israel after all of his time, and there was reasons why they'd been struck down because of great sin in that place. And now it seemed that there was enough food back there for them to make the journey home. And I feel this is like so many refugees around the world who are displaced by famine, by war, by bombings, by terrorism or whatever. And I've met many, many, many in this country. And quite often they'll say, yeah, we want to come here because it's safe. But then they say, but we'd rather be at home. We'd rather be back in Ethiopia. We'd rather be back in various other places, because this country isn't all that. So many people think, it's the promised lands with, streets paved with gold and all that sort of stuff. We've got problems the same as anybody else. But for many of these economic folks, they would much rather be back home. So that's something to pray about, to think about, about how we can pray about situations will change back home, where they can go. So they're going to start to head back, but there's something amazing starts to happen. And in verse 7 to 9, this is what it says: with her 2 daughters-in-law, she left the place where she'd been living and set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. Then Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, go back, each of you, to your mother's home. And then she blesses them. May the Lord show you kindness as you have shown me kindness to your dead husbands and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband. So she was letting them go. Not that she didn't love them, but because she loved them. And what a kind thought it was, to give up that link with her dead sons. And she'd known them for 10, 11 years, quite possibly. She'd known them for quite a few years. And that speaks volumes about Naomi's heart. And then what she does is she prays God's very best blessings upon them to treat them kindly because of their kindness to her, and then to find rest in the home of future husbands. So she was saying, please, just go and enjoy your life. Find somebody else. Move on with life. It's not because I don't love it, it's because I love you. Thank you for all of your kindness. But I want to bless you. I want to bless you into something else. And so often we can almost be caught up in the past in life that we don't realise that God has got much more for us like that. And there's something powerful that I've seen here about letting go of the past as we head into the next stages of life. Wow, how about that? There's freedom in this, but sometimes we've got to bless other people so that so that they can get on with their life, and that's incredibly good. So understandably, there was lots of tears. I mean, you can imagine that they'd been that close. They'd grieved together, they'd laughed together, they'd planned together, they'd hoped for the future together, and then the children died. And then the 2 sons died. So they were incredibly close. And then she kissed them goodbye and said, we will go with you to your people. So at first, both of the daughters-in-law, they wanted to go with her. They said, no, we're going to come with you. And they were willing to return with her to her own people in Israel. It's a place they hadn't been before, which speaks really highly, doesn't it, of their love, absolute love and devotion to Naomi. But Naomi absolutely dissuades them. Absolutely interesting. And I said to her, we will go back with you to your people. But this is what Naomi said. She said, return home, my daughters. How about that? She called them her daughters. There was that relationship. It wasn't, oh, go on, you're just a daughter-in-law. But she uses the word, and in the original language, it means as close as a blood-born child. So that's how she thought of them, not just as like a daughter-in-law or like a stepdaughter or something like that, but as close as her own daughters. And she says to her, return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons who could become your husbands? No. Return home, my daughters. I'm too old to have another child, and even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to sons, which would be a miracle, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters. It's more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has turned against me. At this they wept aloud again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. So she had no sons to offer. She was too old to have a husband. If she did marry and have sons, would they wait until they were old enough to marry? Probably not. And it grieves her to see them suffer because of the circumstances. All through everything, she thought about their welfare. And that's an example to us, isn't it? You know, do we think about other people? Do we think about making sure that other people can have the very best in life, rather than what we want? This is a prime example of this. But Ruth can't be dissuaded. And in the verse 14 it says, but Ruth clung to her. And Naomi says to her, look, said Naomi, your sister-in-law was going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her. Go on. Get on with your life, girl. You know, go and find another young man or something like that. You know, just go and get on with life. But Ruth replied, don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. What an amazing, amazing choice that she made. And this is what she says. Where you go, I will go. And where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me. Now that, when they say that, be it ever so severely, that is really, really big. You know, that's a really big thing to say in those days. It was like calling down an oath upon yourself. It was like standing before a judge and saying, if I do this, then you have complete power to execute me. That's how powerful it was when they used that word in Scripture. Be it ever so severely, it was a legal term. So you imagine that, you know, that if I said, right, I'm not going to have any more pork pies, you know, judge, I'm not going to have that, and if I do, you can execute me. Well, I can guarantee within a month, you know, I would probably have nibbled at some stage on some pork pies somewhere in this nation. I would have found them, and I would have been, you know, taken out of the equation like that. So Naomi Ruth actually really gets on with it and says, look, I'm going to stay with you. I want to stay with you. So they head back. They head back to Jerusalem, and it's quite a journey actually. It wasn't a 2-day thing. It probably took about a couple of weeks to get back there. And when I get back in verse 19, it says, so the woman went on until they came to Bethlehem. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the woman exclaimed, can this be Naomi? Now, there's 2 reasons for that. One, because she was a popular person when she left. And secondly, maybe they didn't quite like her, because we don't know if anybody else actually left Bethlehem, you know, when there was all of this famine going on. You know, nobody likes it when somebody just disappears, do they? I mean, let's be honest about it. You know, did they run away and leave other people there? We don't know. But the fact was that they went and they came back. And Naomi's talks very clearly, and she says, look, I don't want to be called Naomi anymore, which means pleasant and happy, but call me Mara, because my life's been turned bitter, because she feels that God has dealt very bitterly with her. And she said that she left full and she returned empty. That's a topic for next week. You know, but when we look at this, you know, that's how sometimes the Lord will allow us to come under difficult times and difficult circumstances, but he always brings things